Hello, everybody, and welcome back into another episode of the Hockey Writers Roundtable. And we are just running through the NHL teams in our season previews. We're up to the Pittsburgh Penguins and Mike Cranwell. Mike, how's it going? We're closer and closer to the season beginning. Hockey's this month. How's it going?
So excited. I went and got the skates from my mom's house. Matt, we're ready to crack them up and let's go.
Yes, yes, I'm excited. Hockey's been off the TV screen for too long. We've got. I'm just excited. So let's get going with the Pittsburgh Penguins because they've changed quite a bit from the front office. Kyle Dubas taken over GM and president, first president, then GM. I guess he just figured he'd just take over the whole job. And then added a bunch of players in free agency and trades and probably in every position. So let's start with the forwards, which saw some additions. We'll start with Reilly Smith because I think he's probably the biggest one from the Vegas Golden Knights. What do you think he'll bring to this team? Probably going to slot in, well, definitely the top six.
Definitely the top six, and he's an interesting one. We don't get a lot of Vegas games in Ontario unless you want to stay up late. Smith, though, tons of chemistry with Marchessault and that line with Marchessault and William Karlsson was famous in the halcyon days of Vegas. You know, he's a good skater. He's got some physicality. He comes from that Vegas system, so he can clearly play a strong defensive structure, which is something Pittsburgh desperately needs, both from their forwards and specifically on that second line with Malkin. My concern with him is like I don't know if it's what the fans expect, if it's what the team expects. Like this guy's a 20 to 25 goal scorer, 50 points, give or take five in either direction. He's not the second coming of Jake Gensel. He's not young. You know, there's definitely some miles there. He's going to help the team. He's definitely an upgrade on anybody that was in that spot last year. But temper your expectations. And he is a year older. And we know Pittsburgh fans know from just a few years ago when these guys go on deep playoff runs, they come out tired, they're more prone to injury. So just temper your expectations on that one.
Yeah, I mean, he is older. He's 32. I mean, it's not, I guess that's not really old, but it's getting there in hockey terms. So, yeah, but I think he'll still make an impact regardless. Yeah, and they also added quite a few different guys. I don't know where they're going to slot in. I mean, a few probably going to be bottom six guys. They added Matt Nieto, Noel Acciari, Lars Eller, Vinny Stroza, Rem Pitlick from the Montreal Canadiens, and that weird three-way trade with for the Carlson one, which we'll talk about later. Do you want to kind of highlight any of these players that could potentially make an impact?
Not necessarily the ones that I think a lot of people are focusing on. My two are, let's start with Noel Acciari. Full transparency, being in Toronto or being in Ontario, I grew up a Leafs fan. My dad gave me no choice, you do what you got to do. So got to see a lot of Acciari at the end of the regular season and the playoffs last year. And this is a guy that the Leafs fans and Leafs teams are going to miss. And it's not a coincidence that Kyle Dubas came from Toronto to Pittsburgh and brought Acciari with him. Acciari was someone he had targeted for the last couple of years, finally got him at the deadline last year, overpaid him, which happens with the depth of guys in UFA and unrestricted free agency. That's fine. They had the budget for it. Achari is going to make a difference on that, whether it's a third line right wing, whether it's a fourth line center role. And truthfully, I'm not the biggest Lars Eller fan. Year older and not a year faster. I know he's super smart, but you'll see it by halfway through the season, the limitations on Eller. I could see Achari stepping in and being a third line center for this team. I don't know that he's a third line center on a winning team. He's definitely a third line winger or a strong fourth line center on a cup winning team.
Mm.
He's got strong pedigree coming from Boston and St. Louis. He's very fast, very physical, like the quintessential forechecker. Writing about him this summer, he's a guy who, especially in the playoffs, 5 to 9 hits a game, and we're talking legitimate hits, not the homer timekeepers putting a mark down for their own guys. Legitimate hits. He lets you know that he's there, and he's that guy in the playoffs where that 7 foot radius around the net where you score a lot of the playoff goals. He's that guy that scores those goals. I'm not saying he's Joe Pavelski. He will get it done for you down low. My other one, bit of a hot take, Rem Pitlick. This guy is pure offense, very gifted, undersized, but he knows what to do with the puck on his stick. Does that fit on a third line, fourth line? Maybe more fourth line. You can hide him, you can shelter him in some easier minutes. But whereas a lot of the Penguins fans are talking about Alex Nylander, Pitlick's a far better version of that player and someone that I can see rising into that top six if he'll make the commitment to the defensive game. This is a guy that Montreal gave up on because he's very much one side of the ice. So if he's willing to come in and play a 200-foot game, guarantee Mike Sullivan will find some spots for him.
Yeah, they got a lot of, I think, Kyle Dubas type players, and of course he's running the team, so lots of them there, and they're definitely gonna be tougher to play against this season, I think, especially in that bottom six, right? Yeah, I mean they're returning a lot of key players in the off season here, and guys like Crosby and Malkin obviously still here, probably here for the next couple seasons, and still to kind of get a cup. You got Rickard Rakell. Jake Gensel, though, is out with a right ankle injury, that surgery on it for the next 3 months at least. So that's a big player out of your lineup. Do you have any other storylines you're kind of looking at going into training camp here?
Maybe it's just because I follow the team a lot. I find this to be a super interesting team in particular. They had a run of close to 20 years straight making the playoffs, three Stanley Cups in the Crosby Malkin era, and they missed the playoffs last season in a year where if Jarry plays a couple more games, if Brian Dumoulin is just a little better, if Rust is just a little better, any of those factors are worth a point, and they're in the playoffs. Like, this is a very fascinating team. Crosby is still absolutely one of the best in the world, and I would argue at this point, because no one talks about him, he's underrated and he's taken for granted. Did he get tired in the last month last season? Yes. Did Pittsburgh's record reflect it? Yes. That comes down to the coaching. If Mike Sullivan, if whoever's running those forwards isn't overloading his ice time, Crosby will be fresh and he'll give you better minutes, which will get you into the playoffs. On that first line, we'll talk about Brian Rust more later. He's a huge key for me on this team. This was a guy who was a driver for 3 years in a row and fell off a cliff last year. No idea if he was playing injured, if there was some off the ice distractions, whatever it was. They've got to hope that he didn't suddenly get old and that he comes back and is the Brian Rust of old this year. With Gensel's ankle injury, if he's only out the 5 games that the team has said he'll be out, and he can come back and he's 100% and he can push off, he's not a speed guy anyway, so the ankle injury shouldn't affect him the same way it would affect someone else. But as long as he's firing all cylinders, you got a very motivated guy going into his UFA season. Those guys tend to have really good years. Pittsburgh needs something like that. Crosby, I'm comfortable with. I can see him putting up 100 points this year. And if you didn't read that article, check out my article on whether Crosby and Malkin can score 100 points. But Malkin, this is a guy who's had approximately 17 ACL surgeries throughout his career. He's slowing down. He's working a lot off reputation right now, but it's earned. He gets a lot of respect from the other teams because he still's got some drive in those legs. His hands are second to none. His vision is second to none. And having someone like Erik Karlsson to give and go and create with, and someone like Rickard Rakell, who is one of the most underrated finishers in the game, Malkin can still be dangerous, and he'll be carried a little more by other drivers on that line, but Malkin can still do Malkin things. What does Jeff Carter have left in the tank? Late last year, he picked it up a little. Some of the games I saw, that sneaky Brett Hull style where they get the puck down low. Carter sneaks into position. He gets his one-timer off and scores. But this is a guy who looked exhausted last year. If you saw the look in the eyes of Joe Thornton and Patrick Marleau at the end of their careers, Carter had that last season. Still got another year, over $3 million. I think it's 3,125 on the cap. It's an unmovable contract. You can't trade it. You can't bury it. He's on the team. Now, either he's the 13th forward or you've absolutely got to hide him. You cannot play him at center on a winning team anymore. He's too slow. He was never strong defensively to begin with, or at least strong enough for that role. He has to be hidden in a fourth line wing, second line power play. But guys like that, if they're playing too much, it's going to take away from the team. There's a lot of intrigue to how Mike Sullivan will coach this team this year. And to me personally, there's a lot of intrigue as to how much Mike Sullivan still has the ear of this team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. I mean, and there's so many different new guys too. See how they kind of mesh with the new coach too, or with another coach. So I mean, it's always interesting when new guys come in, how the coaching staff deals with them, right? Especially when there's a lot of them. All right, let's move to the defense. You mentioned the big addition, probably one of the biggest additions, I think, in the entire league. Erik Karlsson getting added to this team alongside Chris Letang. Lots of questions about if this is another Brent Burns type thing where Karlsson's going to regress because he's not the main guy. Do you agree with that? Do you think that that's what's going to happen with Karlsson this season, or will he be okay?
It was absolutely my first thought when there was talk about Karlsson coming to Pittsburgh and playing in front of or behind Letang. Karlsson going to Carolina. That Don Waddell's confirmed in the last week he went strong after Karlsson, and San Jose simply didn't like the package as much. Whether Karlsson could play with Burns, I don't think it's as simple though as, well, Karlsson can't play well with another strong right-handed defenseman who likes the puck. They're not on the ice together most of the time. Yeah. And with two lines that are the equivalent of a first line on any team, he's got his pick of lines to play with. It shouldn't be an issue. I think that comes down to the system the coach is playing. There was some off-ice issues with Karlsson and his family at that time, that he was dealing with. He's on 1.5 ankles. If you've read any of the stuff I've written this summer, he's missing half of an ankle bone. That took him a long time to truly recover from, and I would dare say relearn how to play his game with that limitation. You look at the forwards that he had in San Jose. Marleau and Thornton were aging out. Meyer, some of those guys were a little younger. Logan Couture was in his prime, but there wasn't the same quality of players, and the name value didn't necessarily match the output. So there were a handful of different issues for Karlsson that he does not have now in Pittsburgh. Now, don't get me wrong, the wind blows the wrong way, that ankle goes, que sera. But on this team, to play with a genius like Evgeny Malkin, a pure shooter like Raquel, Reilly Smith, who's going to be a jack of all trades on that wing, and probably Marcus Pettersson, who I am going to fawn over later on in this video, as his partner to protect him on the defensive aspect. There's no reason Karlsson shouldn't have a great season. Now, 100 points, anyone's guess. I do think that last year's Erik Karlsson, even on last year's Pittsburgh team, puts up 120 to 130 points, and we're talking an all-time season. Look what he did with San Jose. Yeah. This is not that team. This is a guy that should accidentally get 80 points this year. Beyond Karlsson, was it Carlson Soucy that they signed?
It was Ryan Graves they got.
Ryan Graves. Yeah. They're all these big left-handed defensemen are the same to me. I should have looked at the note. This is a guy with a cannon of a shot. He's solid defensively. He is gigantic, 6'5", 208, I believe is what he's listed at. And GMs are copycats. President of hockey operations and GMs are copycats. They all looked at what Vegas did last year. They won with a bunch of defensemen that combined to form Devastator, 80s Transformers reference. So everyone tries to copy what wins. So this is a solid addition. This is a guy that can play with Chris Letang, can give Letang the safety valve that Letang played the same way last year, whether or not he had the safety valve with Dumoulin, and he did not. Dumoulin was consistently getting beat to the outside, was consistently a step behind, both physically and with his decision-making. You won't have that issue with Graves as long as he picks up the system quickly enough. I expect Graves to have a strong season. I expect Letang, as long as he stays healthy, to have a phenomenal season. I do wonder why this guy keeps having strokes and how he keeps getting cleared. Yeah. These are things they're going to talk about publicly. So you never know when something like that's going to happen. But again, his father passed away during the season last year. He had a stroke and still put together a really good overall B+ season. considering what he had going on off the ice and with his health, it's pretty incredible. Crystal Tang is a hero amongst mortals on this team. So, a calmer season, no issues in the press box with the GM and that internal infighting, a steady defense partner who can protect him better. This defense is kind of stacked 1 through 4. I being in Ontario, I don't get to the States too much, but I got to grab something in Michigan the other day. When it comes to what's in this glass with the defensemen in Pittsburgh, it's water. I love what they've got there. With the forwards, as we've been kind of talking about, it's tequila. It's going to be a little iffy, and we're going to get to the goalies in a second. It is straight up pond water. I am terrified.
All right. Well, you mentioned the goaltending. It's questionable. Tristan Jarry was re-signed when kind of everyone was thinking that they shouldn't do that, at a cap hit that was quite high as well, 5.375. They also signed Alex Nedeljkovic as the backup. Didn't have the best season in Detroit as well. How do you feel about this goaltending? I know you already said you're not really confident about it.
Stream of consciousness here. So follow along when I was writing about did my first roster rebuild for the site, talking about what Pittsburgh should do in the offseason. And I actually had targeted Jonas Korpisalo for the Penguins. I had them at 4x4 for Korpisalo. This was a guy who shone on a horrendous Columbus team. Poor, no offense to Brad Larson, poorly coached team, disengagement from everybody across the board, no depth on defense, with Werenski and a couple of them getting hurt and losing the season. Went to LA, was still solid. He was someone that I could see doing the job in Pittsburgh. And when you saw, so I said 4x4, but it's one of those things where you do something like that and you're like, well, this is what I'm comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And with UFAs, general managers tend to go to the area of slight uncomfortableness to make a deal. He got his $4 million, but it was for that 5th year. And it looked like a situation where if it wasn't Pittsburgh, Ottawa simply added a 5th year on to get Korpisalo from someone. And I say maybe it wasn't Pittsburgh because internally the team really went to bat with Dubas to say, this is our guy. We should keep him. And Dubas actually traveled to Jarry's home and was negotiating in person leading up to the start of UFA. And you saw it go into mid-afternoon before Jarry was even signed. Mm-hmm. So there was lots going on there. So if Dubas was looking at other goalies, I wouldn't be surprised. That's simply good management. You've got to have your hands on a lot of different pots there. Did they sign him for too much? Did they sign him for too long? Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure where the leverage was there on Jarry's side. And if you follow Dubas's career, he's a great trader and not so great with contract negotiations. That said, we have what we have with Jarry. Jarry is, the injuries notwithstanding, as long as they don't rob him of his athleticism, he's super athletic. He is one of those high pedigree guys who has all the potential in the world. And my goodness, we've never really seen him healthy in his prime in a playoff series. So how interesting would that be? We know he's a gamer from when he came back a couple of years ago and played super hurt in that Game 7 where they lost to the Rangers in the first round. So he's got the heart to do it. It's just a matter of staying healthy. That could mean changing his training regimen, doing some things a little differently than the norm, but he's got to figure that out to be worth the value. When it comes to backup goaltending, there's not necessarily a ton of value, except they play more games now. And watching a lot of last year's games, the more I watched Casey DeSmith, this is an undersized guy with shades of Manny Legacy, or if we're going in the Wayback Machine, Pokey Reddick. Small, super fast, tremendous laterally, great agility, made some incredible saves to keep a lackluster Pittsburgh team in the games I was able to watch. To get rid of him to save only $300,000 on the cap for Alex Nedeljkovic, I got some concerns here. This is some flags for me as far as the scouting goes, and here's why. Like, nothing against Nedeljkovic, but he shone in a Carolina system that makes goaltenders look great, whether it's himself, whether it's Antti Raanta, whether it's Frederik Andersen. And not that these guys aren't good players, but they're players who flamed out on other teams. Mm-hmm. You look at Tony DeAngelo on the defense. You look at Skay on the defense that played for the Rangers, And these guys were just about out of the league, and they come to Carolina and they're great. Stefan Noesen on the forwards. This guy's a
Yeah.
journeyman. Carolina turns into a legitimate third liner. He's not a third liner on any other team. Top to bottom on that Carolina team, they turn these guys into players better than what they are.
Mm.
It's also why Carolina doesn't win the Stanley Cup at the end, because the limitations come out. But Carolina plays a system that accentuates strengths and hides weaknesses. Nedeljkovic was badly exposed in Detroit last year. This is a better defensive team. It should certainly be a better system than Detroit,
Mm.
though it won't be Carolina. So, if Nedeljkovic can bring a 905 save percentage, keep his goals saved above expected at even, and just keep them in games, he'll be fine. But to save $300,000 to downgrade from DeSmith to Nedeljkovic, unless there was something else behind the scenes with DeSmith, it's not a move I like.
Mm.
Nedeljkovic's younger. There's potential. Who knows what the goalie coach sees there? But on its surface, it's a risky one for me, and I'm legitimately concerned about this goaltending tandem.
We'll see. Hopefully it turns out better than we expect. So but yeah, we'll see. All right, let's talk about this team as a whole in this division, because it is a tough division. There's quite a few really good teams in here. I didn't make the playoffs on the last day last season. So where do they stack up in the Metro this season?
Well, I love that you mentioned the last day last year. They from their last 15 games, from game 67 through game 81, they went 6-9. This team fell apart. Crosby got tired. The team got tired. The noise from upstairs was deafening. The divide in the team clearly got in the dressing room and got onto the ice. So, with tremendous turnover, something like eight new players on this team, and then adding in Ty Smith from the minors, you've got almost half a team has been turned over. So hopefully the coach's message goes through to new guys. Hopefully it freshens things up in the dressing room for some of the older legs, because this is one of, if not the oldest team in the league. How it stacks up, though, Carolina is an unstoppable beast in the regular season. The Rangers and Devils are on the rise. And as far as the Islanders and the arch rival Washington Capitals, it's one injury, it's one bounce from either of those teams overcoming Pittsburgh. I see Pittsburgh fourth, behind Carolina, the Rangers, and the Devils. But it is something where they've got a strong defense. If Jarry can stay healthy, and if Nedeljkovic can be simply league average, I think the forwards will be there. I think Carlson will be a monster and will free up Letang to do some great things. But I see this team being in that 7-8 spot in terms of making the playoffs. But it's going to be very interesting, that's for sure.
Yeah, because that Atlantic division isn't easy either. There's a lot of good teams, a lot of risers in there too. So yeah, it's gonna be fun to see where it all kind of falls at the end of the season. All right, let's move to our quick fire round, and this is where we do a bunch of quick questions. A lot of these have been made into articles at thehockeywriters.com. So if you want to check out a few of those, check those out. Let's start with our 1 or 2 breakout stars for the Penguins this season.
I've only got one, and it's Marcus Pettersson. This is a guy who, because of how his career has gone to date, you see and hear the talking heads and the writers say all sorts of different things about him. He's an up-and-coming defensive stopper. He's trade bait and everything in between. But the reality is, this is a guy who stepped into his form last year, and on a team that did not do well, he carried the load defensively. He did everything that they wanted Dumoulin to do that he simply couldn't do anymore. He was their defensive monster. Going back and watching the games, in 10 games, I noticed him on the ice one time, and it was for a goal for. This is a low event hockey player, and it's that old adage that the scouts used to, they taught me, and they used to say all the time, if you don't notice a defenseman, it's because he's doing something right. And Pettersson did a lot of things right. He's quick up and out with the puck, with good breakouts. He's a good skater. He takes the body when he needs to. He plays the position. I don't want to say flawlessly, but very well. And this is
Mhm.
a guy who definitely has another level to step up into to become an elite defensive stopper for this team. And if this team goes anywhere this season, and especially in the playoffs, defensively, it's going to be on the back of Marcus Pettersson.
Yeah, I've been really impressed with him throughout too. And anytime there was Canucks talk with trades, I was like, Marcus Pettersson has to be involved. So yeah, he's
Please bring him. Yeah,
all
and
right.
Dubas even, sorry, one more part.
Yeah.
The rumor was San Jose wanted Pedersen as part of the Carlson package. And again, Dubas is great with the trades. If you look at his history, he's got a strong history in the trades, and that was an incredible coup he pulled this summer. And the fact that Pedersen wasn't a part of that deal and Jeff Petrie was speaks volumes to what Pittsburgh got when they got Kyle Dubas. And not only getting Carlson but keeping Pedersen was more than one win for the team there.
100%. Because yeah, I agree. I think he's going to be a big part of the team going forward here. So we'll watch him. All right. Who needs to bounce back this season? Now there's a few candidates here. I think we mentioned at least a couple of
Where do we
them.
start? The team didn't make the
Everyone.
playoffs. They floundered badly at the end. Um, you can talk about Jeff Carter, but I think that gas tank is empty. And I think halfway through the year you'll start to see him getting right on the end of the bench and wearing a suit in the press box. My main one here is Brian Rust. The last 3 seasons he ranged from 3/4 of a point a game to just over a point a game player. He was a true top six, to a true first line winger, something that Crosby has not had a lot of in his career. Someone that Crosby and Malkin both would go to the coach and say, I want to play with this guy. I want to play with this guy. You watch Russ last year, it was not the same guy. I have no idea what happened. The speed was still there in moments, but he was utterly disengaged. He was wildly inconsistent. He took penalties for not moving his feet and trying to lunge into situations late. He watched goals get scored that he could have done something to stop. Whatever was going on last year, again, as long as he didn't suddenly get old, he has to come in and have a strong year. Crosby's not getting any younger, and you can't take for granted that Crosby will continue to be Sidney Crosby forever. You've got to have strong people around him to make his life easier, especially getting into the playoffs. And Rust, more than Gensel, more than anyone else on the team, is that guy. Pittsburgh is a far better, far stronger team if Russ can even be a top six player. If he's what he was last year, this Penguins team is going to need to make a trade. Rust's contract is unmovable if he's not playing well. So Rust is really we're going to talk about X factor soon. Rust is if not an X factor, he's my bounce back guy. He has to have a good year.
Yeah, I agree with that too, because he's big part of that top six for sure, and power play too. All right, X Factor. So who's an X Factor this
Pick.
season? Or what?
So for me, it's not as simple as saying, well, it's Rust or it's Carlson's ankle maintaining its integrity. Really, it's the Fab Four of Crosby, Malkin, and Letang and Carlson, along with Tristan Jarry. These guys are the true core of the team, and you can even add Pettersson into that group. And how they play will determine where Pittsburgh ends up if they're a playoff team, if they're a strong contender in the playoffs. If these guys can all play, 70, if not really 75 games, not Jarry, 55, but if these guys can play the majority of the games and stay healthy, this is a playoff team. Pretty much the back end of the team can fall off a cliff and these guys will still carry them into the back end of the playoffs. If not, if any of them get hurt, if Malkin has a considerable drop off, his shooting last year, his shooting percentage dropped. His decision making with his shots wasn't strong in the games I watched. You hope that Carlson can rectify that and carry him, so to speak, and put him in easier situations. If he can't, if Malkin falls off, if Crosby suddenly gets old, if any of these guys have any injury issues, like Letang missing a month and a half, this team becomes a problem. And this is the issue with any team, but it becomes more highlighted with older teams. They've traveled for more years. They've skated more and more thousands and thousands of miles. They've had more injuries. They've put more time in the gym doing some good things and wearing out joints with other exercises. So it's It's more of a risk with these older teams. And this comes back to the coaching. I'll always take it back to the coaching. Coach Sullivan and the assistant coaches, they need to watch the ice time. They need to not worry about, it's fun to write an article. It's a popcorn article. Will these guys score 100 points? The reality is it doesn't matter. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter. What matters is they go into the playoffs fresh and healthy, because the best team doesn't win the Stanley Cup. The healthiest team with the best system does, because from 1 through 16, most of these teams will have a similar skill level at the end of the day. Whoever's healthy plays better. When Matthew Tkachuk got hurt, Florida lost their engine.
Yeah.
One of these guys gets hurt. If it happens, Pittsburgh will lose their engine. So they have to keep them healthy so that this engine purrs.
Yeah, it is. It's very true. I mean, health is a huge part of everything, and it's always the healthiest teams that win the cup. I mean, it's basically what it is, right? Okay, let's talk about some rookies or prospects. Now, the Pittsburgh Penguins do not have a lot of these guys, and with all their additions, there's really not a lot of room. But do you see any rookies that could surprise and make the team out of training camp?
Or anyone who watched our Edmonton season preview, you got a similar idea of what's going to happen here. If Edmonton didn't have much left, this is a barren desert in Pittsburgh. There's no true rookies to me that could make an impact. As far as young players, again, a lot of focus is going to be on Alex Nylander, former 8th overall pick, has the pedigree that everyone so loves to talk about. It's another topic for another day. I don't love that term. Has a skill level, but the engagement isn't there. The defense of the 200-foot game isn't there. The intensity isn't there. He's not going to be a factor unless he suddenly wakes up and matures and becomes a different personality on the ice. For me, and if you read some of my stuff this summer, he's not a true rookie because he's aged out, but Radim Zohorna is my guy. 6'6", 220 pounds. He's 27 years old. So if it's going to happen, it's going to be now. He's got just enough hands to play in the NHL. He is a big version of a Jarry. Maybe not quite as physical, but similar. And he can skate. And when you're 6'6" and you can play center and skate, that is not the worst guy to have as your fourth line center. Now everyone's going to say, well, he's a minor leaguer. He's not. He's one of those guys who's never been given a proper chance. When he played in Toronto, and he's played a couple of games in Toronto, so I've seen him, he is legit. Dubas signed him for a reason, because Pittsburgh under Ron Hextall got rid of him last year. Yeah. And Zohorna, if you read the reports coming out of camp, probably should have made the team last year. He's a true fourth liner. He can kill penalties, and this is a team that needs penalty killers, whether it's offense or defense. And again, that size and that speed, that is ultra intimidating. This is a guy that you could get 2 or 3 good years out of, and this is the first year. That's someone who's young and hungry, and you need that, especially on an older team, someone who's fighting to stay in the league because they're going to fight to win for your team. That's my guy.
Yeah, that's a good choice. I've liked whatever I've watched him play. He's been good too. All right. Well, they do have some prospects though. They did draft someone pretty good this past draft. So who are you watching in the system this season?
Yeah. Jaeger was good. Sounds similar to Jagger. And he was one that coming into this season, or about a year and a half before the draft, there was talk, is he going to be top 5, top 10, and he fell to the middle of the draft to Pittsburgh. As the scouting book has evolved on him, they're seeing maybe more of a second line center than a first line center. That's okay. Pittsburgh's not used to this. They're used to first and second overall draft picks. It's okay to have a good second line center. On a lot of teams, Jonathan Toews would have been a good second line center. So yeah. These guys can end up being clutch playoff performers and even Hall of Famers. So he's definitely one to watch. You want to see him go back to junior next year and just absolutely not just tear it up, but just eviscerate it. If he does, then maybe he's got an outside shot at being a first liner. If not, then you probably know you've got a second line player there. Owen Pickering on defense, so they've got at least one good forward in the system. Owen Pickering's their best defensive prospect. This is a guy who's probably 2 years away, and at least 2 years away from making any real impact. But he had a strong year last year. He's probably not going to be your power play quarterback, but he is someone who should be able to play in the top four, be more of a defensive stopper. Maybe not quite on the level defensively as Pettersson, but offer maybe a little more in terms of puck movement there. He's someone, if you're watching those junior games, to keep an eye on. They're starting to build that farm system, and Dubas is one of those guys who's always wanted to, but has been working with teams that are trying to do something in the playoffs. So he's not afraid to move guys for the sake of winning. So don't be surprised also if the two people that we highlight as interesting end up gone for a better piece this year, especially if they're in contention, if there's an injury, if someone gets old all of a sudden. So you'll be watching them for one reason or another this year.
Well, if I was them, I wouldn't, because they need these guys to rebuild their system after these guys retire, because they will eventually. But they need some guys. Okay, now this could be obvious because there's two guys that are probably going to do this. But who's going to lead the team in scoring at forward and defense? Now, the defense may be interesting.
Wouldn't it be funny if Carlson led the entire team?
Yeah, right.
I mean, if you look at the numbers last year, he did. So it can't be too much of a surprise this year. You know, a lot of the scoring comes down to the power play. I'm going to go into the special teams for a second with this one, because looking at the power play this week, you're kind of forced to put Gensel on the first unit, which is difficult because it will push either Letang or Rickard Rakell off that unit. Letang is a tremendous quarterback. When he wants to take over a game, he is full Erik Karlsson. He is full Paul Coffey. He can do anything. And to take a guy like that off just to have a net front presence, it's probably a necessary evil, but an evil nonetheless. To take Rakell off, this is a guy who, a far better version of what Jeff Carter has left in the tank, who sneaks into position, who takes those passes from down low, who is a wicked one-timer, a wicked wrist shot, and can flat out put pucks past goalies. You want guys like Karlsson and Letang playing with guys like Rakell. But if you have Rakell and Karlsson and Letang on the ice together, you're either taking Malkin off the power play for Gensel, or you've got nobody in front of the net.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be a rather unique setup. So Pittsburgh's going to have an interesting setup this year on the power play. And why I mentioned in terms of the points, Malkin puts up a lot more points on the power play than Crosby. And the power play is a time where they call them cheap points or easy points to get a lot of those points. So Crosby should be the leading scorer among the forwards. He should be less likely to get hurt than someone like Malkin. Letang should succeed the throne defensively scoring wise to Karlsson, and all the talk out of Pittsburgh is Letang is all good with everything. Thank you, Erik Karlsson, for coming in. You'll carry some of the load, make my life easier, and let's go win. So Crosby and Karlsson, they're the easy choices. They're the obvious ones, and I'm going to go with them because they're easy and obvious for a reason.
Yeah, that's what I was assuming. I thought that's probably what it would be. But yeah, we'll see.
Zahorna.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Trades. Now you mentioned a couple. You did mention trades there. Who could be traded before the deadline? Because if they're in a playoff position, they could try to bolster something that they see as a weakness going into the playoffs. But who do you see as being trade bait?
You know, and I'm with you in terms of I'd rather them keep their prospects. They're very limited in what they have. It's one of those things though where banners fly forever, and if you think you've got a chance, you'll pull the trigger on that. So if they've got a chance, you know, maybe Jeff Carter has a heart of gold and says, "Sure, trade me," just to move the cap hit. I don't see it happening though, and it's nothing against Jeff Carter. It's just, why would you leave a contender? So you can see the Pickering and Yeagle going, like they're a good couple of young guys. It's, to me, off the roster, there's not a lot that would go right now because Dubas assembled this team to win. If I got to pull up the name. He makes Lars Eller makes such an impact on me. I blanked on his name for a second. I don't foresee Lars Eller being this great third line center for a
Mm.
cup winning team. To me, he's a fourth line center. Uh, Colorado tried him second line center
Yeah.
last year. You saw how well that went in the first round. And even watching highlights of Colorado play Pittsburgh, I watched Pittsburgh players beat Eller in the defensive
Mm.
zone to score. This is as smart as he is, you can only move your feet so fast. And this is such a fast game now that smarts only gets you so far. So unless you're going to have someone like a Jarry or someone they trade for play that third line center and bump Eller to fourth, Eller's someone I could see
Mm.
not panning out for what they want. I'm looking at this team as a GM on a contender. Lars Eller is not my third
Mm.
line center. They're just not going to win the cup with him as a third line center.
Mm.
So he's someone I could see going. Carter's someone I could see going. If Drew O'Connor doesn't show up, the book's out on him. He has great training camps and just doesn't quite bring that extra gear. I really hope he sits under the Achari learning tree this year and becomes a poor man's version of that, because that'll
Yeah.
keep him in the league. If not, that's someone else who could go. Where it'll get interesting, Matthew, I think, is if this team falls out of contention, because you're going to hear the rush trade rumors. You'll
Yeah.
probably see Gensel dealt at that point. Why wouldn't they? They can sign him back in the offseason.
Yeah.
They could recoup some real assets, starting with a first and probably a young pick, if not more, for
Mhm.
someone like that. That's where it's going to get interesting. You could see Reilly Smith on the move too at that point. He's new here. There's no real connection, and if he's here 5 months and they're not going anywhere,
Mhm.
expect him to be out as well.
Yeah, that's gonna get really interesting if they're out of out of the playoffs picture. That's for sure, because a lot of high end names will be thrown around for sure right away. Okay, last question, and these I love these questions. So, a bold prediction or a hot take for this season?
Well, they're not going to win the Stanley Cup. How bold is that? Let's start there. I said the same thing about Edmonton. These are teams that are going for it. But so I love Pittsburgh's defense, even on 5 and 6. P.O. Joseph, Ty Smith. I'm playing Smith over Chad Ruedel.
Mm.
Sorry, Chad, if I pronounced your name wrong. Um, I'll take the holes in Smith's game and let him learn. Ruedel is what he is, and he was not strong last year. There were some real basic mistakes that he was making, stuff that should have been coached at a young age. And when you start making those mistakes again, it means there's something wrong between the ears, as they used to
Mm.
say. So if he's overthinking, that's not someone you want on the ice. I'd rather Smith be learning, and Smith's got 2 years in the NHL, so why not leverage it? Let him get the puck out of the net, or out of the zone, excuse me. Teach him how to play a decent zone defense in there. But this just isn't a team as constituted right now that is going to win. Can
Mm.
they win? Absolutely. Do they have enough talent to win? Absolutely. But will they stay healthy?
Mm.
Tristan Jarry, you can't trust him until you can trust him, and he's never done it yet to be able to.
Mm.
Um, Team Canada, they're starting to look at World Cup of Hockey 2025 or Team Canada, and you'll have something from me out this week on that. And if whether or not Jarry's on the team, it's not because he's proven it when it counts. It's the skill level.
Mm.
So you hope with that skill level that he can do it. But I think Carlson will be fine. I think they'll be a better offensive team. I think it'll be a solid year. I don't see them overtaking any of the top three, with New York, New Jersey, and
Mm.
Carolina. Um, I just they're not going to win. This The window's closed, and I hope I'm wrong. Honestly, I
Yeah.
hope I'm wrong. I'd love to see them win. Or at least play Toronto in the conference final.
Yeah.
But you imagine? I don't see it happening though.
Yeah, I mean, stuff can happen. I mean, no one anticipated. I mean, I don't think anyone anticipated the Florida Panthers making it to the Stanley Cup final, and and they're a strong team. They've got a lot of that similar pieces. So, I mean, we'll see. They are younger though. They are definitely younger.
It's
Um,
the coaching. Like you look at what the coaches allowed guys like Brandon Montour to do, and where guys who had failed on other teams, um, and they come in, and Florida, and Maurice isn't the best coach, but he does a lot of the right things at the right times. That's why he's been in the game for 30 years. They let these guys shine, accentuate the strengths, hide the weaknesses. Like, go back to Sullivan's system. Watching this team play last year, what is the system?
Yeah.
Because whatever it was, they weren't playing it. They weren't committed to it. So you hope turning over half the roster almost will allow for new buy-in. But
Mhm.
I do think Sullivan needs to tweak this system and he needs to get more defensive buy-in. Whatever he said to Phil Kessel back in 2016 and 2017, he needs to say the same thing to this team now because they need to be more engaged defensively. This can't be like the NBA where they don't play defense in the regular season and then come playoff time, they start hand checking guys. They have to show up in the regular season.
Yeah.
And all of this is going to come down to whether or not. So I have no doubt that Sullivan has the respect of the room. He's won 2 Stanley Cups as their coach. Crosby and these guys will go to the wall for him. They love him. But respect and execution are two different things. And if
Mhm.
he can't get them to execute anymore, he's not Dubas's guy. And
Mhm.
Dubas is a nice guy, but Dubas is a shrewd general manager and president, and he will make the tough
Yeah.
decisions.
Yeah, that's another one to kind of watch for is the coach. Depending if he's gonna be here all season, we'll see. But thanks, Mike, for joining for the season preview for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Lots of interesting things to follow in training camp and at the beginning of the season and throughout. So, but before we get going, give everyone your social media and where everyone can find your stuff.
Well, I mean, I used to do a lot of martial arts, so if you want to see old clips of me doing black belt gradings and training in Muay Thai, check out my Instagram at Mike Cranwell. Otherwise, the hockeywriters.com got a handful of articles up there recently. We're talking about the season. We'll be talking about Team Canada for the World Cup later this week. It's going to be a super interesting year. And if you're a C++ coder, find me on LinkedIn. We're always hiring good software developers at my tech company.
All right. Well, make sure you're checking out all the Pittsburgh Penguins writers at the hockeywriters.com. We got lots of preview stuff coming out every day. We got preseason coming, so there's going to be a lot more of that coming as well. Follow us on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call that right now. And yeah,
Why?
yeah, whatever. Yeah. And follow us at thehogwriters.com throughout the season as well, because we got lots of stuff coming for everyone from every team.
Absolutely.
So yeah, until next time, we'll see you on another episode of the Hockey Writers Roundtable.
Cheers. Go Penguins.